When the night calls you by name, keep your mouth closed. That sounds like a line from a campfire story. But I learned it the hard way. I am 30 now, and what happened when I was 16 is still sharp enough to cut through ordinary days. I walked away from that riverbed alive, yet I have never been sure I walked away alone. My name is Javier. I grew up in a small pueblo where the edge of town turns quickly into scrub hills and dark tree lines. Back then, me and my 3 closest friends moved like a single unit. Renzo, Mateo, and Ivan. We were not chasing trouble. We were chasing quiet. The kind you cannot find under a roof with parents listening. A few kilometers out, there is a Rio Seco, a dry riverbed that only fills after storms. Most of the year it is packed earth, stones, and driftwood, flanked by tall trees that keep the place shaded and hidden. It was never a tourist spot. That was why we went there. No cars, no neighbors, no noise except what nature makes. That afternoon we packed tents, a small pot, food, and 2 heavy lanterns. The path up the hill was familiar, dusty and narrow, with brittle leaves that snapped under our shoes. The air tasted of dry soil and sun-heated bark. Near the last curve, an older woman passed us with a bucket. She slowed down, studied our backpacks, and spoke in the same tone someone uses to warn about a loose dog. Out there before dawn, she said, you sometimes see women walking, not along the road, she added, but inside the trees. Then she kept going as if she had said nothing special. Renzo laughed the moment she was out of earshot. Mateo added a joke. Ivan stayed quiet. I tried to make the words harmless by giving them a harmless explanation. Maybe women from a nearby ranch, maybe teenagers sneaking out. We reached our usual clearing. 3 older trees stood around it like corners, and a fallen trunk lay nearby. Good for sitting. We pitched the tents quickly. The stakes hit hard ground with dull thuds. Mateo and I gathered branches while Renzo checked the lantern batteries and Ivan sorted the food. When the fire caught, it threw warm light across the dirt and made the place feel like a living room without walls. We ate and talked until the sky turned dark. The first part of night was calm. The fire popped gently, and far away an insect sang. The riverbed held heat, so the cold came late. Nothing in the trees moved in a way that drew attention. When the coals sank low, we crawled into our tents. Renzo called goodnight. Mateo answered. Ivan said nothing. I stayed outside a moment, watching the embers dim, because I like the way the last glow makes you think the night is under control. Then the air changed. It did not drift colder the way it usually does. It dropped as if a cold layer had slid over the ground. My skin tightened. The smoke from the fire did not rise. It sagged. For a second, I thought a wind had turned, but there was no wind. I stood and looked around, and that is when I saw it. A thin branch was planted upright near one of the trees, pushed into the dirt, like a stake. 2 strips of cloth were tied near the top. They were gray, dirty, and frayed, not decorative, not accidental. They hung slack, yet they shifted slightly as if reacting to something I could not feel. I knew it had not been there earlier. We had walked across that spot while gathering wood. I lifted the lantern and went closer. The cloth carried a damp, sour smell, like earth, dug from below the dry crust. The soil at the base looked pressed down, disturbed in an oval, as if someone had forced the stake deeper and tamped it in place. I searched for footprints and found only scuffed leaves and darker dirt. My brain started tossing out excuses. Someone marked a spot. Someone left trash. I grabbed the easiest one because it let my hand stop shaking. I did not call the others. I did not touch the stake. I only stared long enough to feel foolish. Then I crawled into my tent and zipped it shut. Inside the tent, the air smelled of nylon and sweat. I shut off the lantern and lay down. For a minute, the night sounded normal. Leaves shifted. Insects clicked. The fire gave a last faint crackle. Then the sounds cut out, all at once, like a radio turned off. When the insects die mid-song, something has taken the air hostage. The silence felt too clean, too complete. Even the fire went quiet. My ears strained until my jaw hurt. A footstep landed on the packed earth, slow and steady. Another followed. The same spacing, the same weight. It did not sound like a shoe. It sounded like bare skin dragging lightly, then pressing down. The steps moved around the camp, circling, pausing, circling again, as if whoever walked was mapping the tents by touch. A woman's voice murmured nearby, low and calm. I could not understand the words, only the certainty in the tone, like someone speaking to a person in front of them. My throat tightened. I told myself it was one of my friends, but my body refused the lie. The wall of my tent sank inward at the height of my arm. Not a flutter, a firm pressure, shaped like a hand resting there. Palm and fingers holding steady for several seconds. I stayed frozen. When the pressure released, the fabric snapped back. Near my head, a voice whispered my name. So close, it did not feel like it traveled through air. I lay there with my hands clenched around the sleeping bag, staring at the dark curve of the tent roof. My mind tried to build a map that would explain the sound. No nearby houses, no road close, no reason for anyone to be walking circles in a dry riverbed at that hour. The map collapsed every time the next footstep landed. Steady and sure, I reached for the lantern and kept my finger off the switch. I did not want light to become an invitation. The steps continued, making a slow loop that tightened and loosened as if whoever walked was deciding where to stop. The murmur drifted with it. Not loud, never urgent, simply present. Breathing appeared at the tent wall again, deep enough that I could hear the air move. The sound sat right outside the nylon, as if a face leaned close, listening for me. I held my breath until my chest hurt, then let it out in a thin thread. After a while, lying still felt worse than moving. I snapped the lantern on and yanked the zipper down. Cold air spilled in. I stepped out and swept the beam across the camp, expecting the light to catch someone squinting and running. Nothing. Renzo's tent was zipped shut. Mateo's was zipped shut. Ivan's was dark. The fire had dropped to embers, but even the embers looked wrong, glowing without the usual crackle, as if the heat had been muffled. I walked toward the tree where I had seen the stake. The lantern showed pressed leaves and scuffed dirt in curved tracks, like someone had walked slow circles in socks or bare feet. The marks did not match our shoes. They curved neatly around the tents, then drifted away, then returned. A brief whisper came from my right, close enough to make me flinch. I swung the lantern. The beam hit a trunk, then empty space. No body, no shadow with a human shape. The whisper did not repeat, and that made it worse. It felt deliberate, like a small test. I did not chase it. Every step farther from the tents made my spine tighten. I backed away, crawled into my tent, and shut the zipper. The lantern went dark again. Within seconds, the footsteps returned, calm as before, as if my sudden appearance had only confirmed that I was inside. The rest of the night stretched into pieces. Footsteps would circle, pause, circle again. Sometimes they stopped near the zipper, and I heard fabric shift as if fingers brushed it. Once there was a soft pull, then release. The woman's murmur floated past, stopped, then resumed from a different angle. The silence around it stayed thick, as if the riverbed itself was holding its breath for her. Dawn did not arrive like a sunrise. It leaked in, gray and slow. When the tent fabric finally lightened enough to show shapes, Renzo's zipper rasped. His lantern flicked on. I heard him step out and stand still. Then he whispered my name, not calling, just checking. I crawled out. Mateo followed, eyes wide and sleepless. Ivan came last, moving carefully, as if he expected the ground to grab him. We did not pretend we had slept. Renzo said someone had tugged the corner of his tent from outside. Mateo said he heard breathing behind his head, steady and close. Ivan said the wall near his feet had been pushed in like a knee or a hand. When they looked at me, I told them about the pressure on my tent wall and the voice. None of them laughed. The jokes were gone. We searched the ground first, hoping to find a rational sign. A shoe print, a cigarette butt, something ordinary. At the edge of the clearing the soil was looser, and that is where the proof waited. Bare footprints, small and clear, the heel pressed deep, the toes spread. They formed a ring around the tents, circling like a boundary line. Some prints were sharp enough that the ridges of displaced dirt still stood up. Shadows can fool you, but those footprints were proof. Renzo squatted and held his boot next to one print, too small. Mateo checked his own feet as if he might have sleepwalked. Ivan kept looking into the trees, breathing fast. None of us had been barefoot. None of us had made those marks. Then, Ivan pointed to a flat stone a few meters away. Something sat on it, placed neatly, as if set down with care. A small bag tied with string. Mateo lifted it by the knot, arm extended. Renzo nodded once. Mateo untied it and opened the mouth. Inside was dark soil, almost black, mixed with snapped twigs. No drawings, no charms, nothing you could explain with a movie, just dirt and wood. The smell rose immediately, wet and cold, like the cloth on the stake, like soil from a deep hole. That bag had not been there when we arrived. I knew because I had sat on that stone to rest earlier. Renzo swore too. Matteo muttered that someone had put it there while we slept, or while we were all together, and both options were impossible. We huddled near the fire as if it were a friend. The embers should have held longer. We had fed the flames with thick branches. Still, the coals seemed to collapse into ash faster than they should. Renzo added a dry stick. It flared briefly, then faded as if the heat had been pulled away. Fire should fade slowly. That night it went out like it was being drunk. The woman's voice returned, closer than before. It moved around us in short shifts, always just outside the lantern beams. Each time we swung light toward it, the sound slipped to another gap between trunks. We saw no branches sway, no leaves rustle, only the voice, and the feeling that someone stood behind the trees watching for the moment our lights turned away. Matteo kept insisting there had to be people. Renzo kept saying, people cannot move like that without showing themselves. Ivan said almost nothing. He only whispered that we should go. Now, I stepped toward my tent to grab my backpack, and my eyes caught something between two trees in the distance. A pale shape, upright, still. For a blink it looked like a bald woman standing with her arms slightly forward, facing the camp. Then it was gone, either swallowed by darkness or erased by my own fear. A hard knock cracked against the fallen trunk, loud in the quiet like wood struck by a stone. We spun our lanterns toward it. No rock lay there, no fresh mark. The sound had happened, and the place returned to stillness. We tightened our circle, and that is when we saw what should have been impossible. In the center of the camp, where our backpacks had been, a small figure made of twisted branches had appeared. Bound with a strip of gray cloth, it looked like a crude doll, all angles and tension, the knot facing upward. None of us had placed it. None of us had stepped away. Matteo lifted his lantern, and the shadow of the branch figure stretched across the ground toward my tent, as if the thing had been positioned to point at me. Seeing that branch doll in the middle of our clearing snapped something in us. It was not just fear anymore. It was the certainty that whatever was around us could cross the space between trees and tents without being seen. Renzo said we were leaving, and his voice came out hoarse. Matteo agreed immediately. Ivan just nodded, eyes fixed on the dark gaps beyond the lantern light. We started grabbing gear with clumsy hands. Backpacks first, lantern batteries. Anything that mattered for getting home. Food could stay. Stakes could stay. The doll could stay. I stepped toward my tent, then stopped because the air shifted again. A thin gust slid through the riverbed barely enough to stir dust. The cloth strips on the stake lifted and settled. The woman's voice cut off mid-murmur. For 2 beats the place went so still I could hear my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. Then footsteps erupted, fast and multiple. They did not have the slow, patient rhythm from earlier. These were quick taps and slaps, bare feet hitting dirt in short bursts. The sound moved from left to right, then behind, then left again, like a pack circling. Renzo swung his lantern and caught a flash of pale movement between trunks, a calf, an elbow. Something human-shaped that disappeared the instant the beam reached it. Matteo shouted a curse. Ivan made a small sound and backed into me. The footsteps tightened. They were close enough that the ground felt alive. The woman's voice returned in small pieces, not one continuous speech, but short murmurs that stopped and started as if signaling. I turned in a slow circle, trying to keep my lantern steady, trying to keep the light from shaking. My beam hit the stake again, and the cloth strips hung there like damp tongues. The smell of wet soil rose stronger, carried on cold air that did not feel like weather. I wanted to believe we had stumbled into a group of people playing a sick joke, but the air itself felt different, heavier, as if the riverbed had become a room with no windows. The footsteps stopped, silence pressed down. In that silence, breathing appeared, strong and regular, as if someone stood just beyond the lantern edge, inhaling through an open mouth. I could not see a face, yet I could feel a presence, not a thought, a physical weight near the light. Renzo shouted into the trees, demanding to know who was there. His voice sounded bright and fragile, like glass in the cold. No answer came. Then my lantern found her. She stood between 2 trees, close enough that the light reached her skin clearly. A woman with a bald head, barefoot on the packed earth, pale and dry. Her shoulders were raised slightly, rigid. Her arms were forward at mid-height, hands open as if feeling for something in the air. She did not speak. She did not blink. She simply stared with a stillness that felt trained. Behind her, deeper in the trees, two more figures moved. Two other bald women, barefoot, stepping carefully without hesitation. They did not rush. They did not hide. They moved as if they knew exactly where each of us was, even when our lanterns did not point at them. Matteo sucked in a sharp breath. Ivan whispered something that might have been a prayer. Renzo tried to steady his lantern, but the beam trembled and slid across the woman's face. Her mouth was slightly open. Her breathing was loud enough that I could hear it over my friends. The damp earth smell came with it, cold and metallic, like rust on stone. Renzo took a step back and bumped the fallen trunk. The sound made the bald woman react. She advanced 2 steps, not quickly, but directly, as if closing a distance she had already chosen. Matteo lifted his lantern and aimed it at her hands. Her fingernails were long and packed with dirt. The skin around them looked cracked. Her knuckles were scraped, and under the dirt her hands were unmistakably human. That detail settled my stomach into a knot. Monsters are easier when they are exaggerated. A real hand, dirty from digging, belongs to something that has been doing a task. The 2 women behind her shifted. One to the left, one to the right, widening their curve. They were not searching. They were arranging. Renzo tried talking, saying we had done nothing, that we were leaving. The woman did not respond. Her breathing stayed steady. Her hands remained forward, and I realized she was not reaching for our bodies. She was reaching for the space, as if feeling for a boundary we could not see. We did not discuss again. We moved as one, grabbing backpacks and turning toward the trail out of the riverbed. We ran. The path was uneven, full of roots and stones that caught at shoes. Lantern beams bounced wildly, turning the trail into a flickering tunnel. Behind us, the footsteps came 2 faster now, and more numerous than our 4 sets. The sound swelled, then dropped, then swelled again, as if the pursuers were weaving between trees rather than following the trail. Then the voices began. Javier, a woman's voice said behind me, soft and careful, as if imitating someone who loved me. The sound crawled under my skin. I did not answer. Do not return your name to the dark, Renzo. Another voice followed, closer, with a mocking tilt. Matteo, Ivan. Each name landed in a different tone, some almost gentle, some sharp, all clear. They did not shout. They did not call like people calling across distance. They spoke as if they were close enough to touch us. Matteo stumbled once and caught himself. Renzo shouted for him to keep moving. Ivan was breathing in short bursts, but his feet did not slow. We kept our eyes forward because turning your head in a place like that feels like opening a door. As we climbed, the air warmed slightly, as if the cold had been cooled down in the riverbed. Still, the footsteps did not vanish. Sometimes they sounded right behind us, then suddenly far to the side, as if they could cut through brush without effort. The voices faded, then returned, always trying the names again, always inviting a reply. Ahead, a faint glow appeared through trees, steady and low, not like a lantern swinging. We slowed without deciding to. Any light at that hour can be danger. We approached with the last of our strength. An older man stood on the path holding a hand lamp. He lifted it and illuminated our faces, our dusty clothes, our shaking hands. He did not look surprised. His expression was hard and focused, like someone who has seen a pattern enough times to recognize it from far away. He asked what happened. Renzo tried to speak and choked on his own breath. I forced words out and said there were women in the riverbed. 3 of them, bald, barefoot, too close. The man nodded once, as if confirming what he already suspected. He told us to keep going until we reached the main road. He said he would walk behind us. Matteo asked if he had seen them. The man said he had heard about them more times than he wanted. They stay off the road. They thread themselves through the trunks, he said. They do not like light, but they know how to move around it, and they listen for one thing more than anything else. Names, I said before he could. He glanced at me sharply, then looked forward again. If they call you, he said, do not answer, do not argue, do not look back. We walked, not running now, because the steadiness of the man's lamp made the path feel less like a trap. I listened to his footsteps behind us and tried to match my breathing to something normal. Still, every few moments I thought I heard a second set of steps, lighter, bare, somewhere in the brush. No one else spoke. Speaking felt like offering a target. The path widened. The sky shifted from black to gray. Far away a dog barked, and the sound made my eyes sting with relief. When the main road finally appeared, pale in the growing light, the air changed as if we had crossed a line. The pressure at the back of my neck eased. Insects began to click again. Wind moved the leaves the way wind is supposed to. I should have kept my face forward. I did not. I turned and raised my lantern toward the ridge above the riverbed, toward the place where our fire had been. 3 figures stood there in a straight line, motionless, heads pale against the trees. They did not chase. They did not wave. They simply faced us, as if they had been waiting for the moment I would give them my eyes. I felt, with sick certainty, that my looking was the thing they wanted most. I dropped the lantern beam and faced the road again. Renzo grabbed my sleeve and pulled me forward. The older man did not shout at me. He only said, low enough that it felt like a sentence passed in court, that now I could never claim I had not seen. We reached the first houses, and the man stopped near a fence post. He introduced himself as Don Esteban. He told us to go home and not to return to the riverbed at night. His last words followed me harder than the footsteps had. Some places are not hunting bodies. They are hunting a person who will swear they saw. Don Esteban walked with us until the streetlights and roofs were close enough to make the trees look ordinary. He did not stay long. He only waited until we were inside the edge of town, then turned back toward the hill as if guarding the path behind us. We separated quickly, each of us choosing a different street. Being together suddenly felt unsafe, like the night could follow the sound of our group. I reached my house with dust on my legs and smoke in my hair. My mother asked where I had slept. I said at Renzo's and went straight to my room before she could ask more. I tried to lie down, but the moment my eyes closed the clearing came back. The stake with its cloth, the ring of bare footprints, the bald woman standing in the lantern beam, breathing like she had been walking for hours. The worst part was the quiet, how the entire riverbed had shut its mouth at once. Sleep did not come. When it finally did, it came in short, violent pieces. At school, we did not talk about it the way teenagers talk about normal scary things. There was no bragging, no joking. Renzo avoided my eyes for a while, not because he blamed me, but because my looking back had made the ridge image real. Mateo tried to explain it as people, as something we were not meant to witness, and that explanation could not survive the footprints. Ivan stopped going out at night altogether. None of us returned to the Rio Seco. Not even at noon, not even in a group, not even to retrieve what we left behind. Weeks passed, and the dreams kept coming. Sometimes I would wake with my heart racing because I had heard my name, not from the hall, not from outside, but from a place that felt too close. I would sit up and listen, and the house would be normal. I learned that fear can live in the body even when the room is empty. There was a detail I never shared with the others, because I could not find a way to say it without sounding insane. After the sun rose that morning, and we shoved our tents into backpacks with shaking hands, I looked into my tent to check I had not forgotten anything. On the inner wall, near where the hand shape had pressed the night before, there were 4 faint streaks of dark soil, dragged downward as if dirty fingers had slid along the fabric. The marks were damp. They smelled like the wet black soil from the little bag. My socks were clean. My hands were clean. None of us had touched the inside of my tent with mud. I rubbed at the streaks and they smeared easily, like fresh earth. I rolled the tent up fast and buried the marks in folds of nylon. Ever since, when I remember that first whisper of my name, I cannot picture it as a voice outside. I picture it as something close enough to speak without using air. Close enough that the boundary of fabric meant nothing. The stake, the bag, the branch doll, the ring of bare footprints. They felt less like random threats and more like steps in a method, a way of setting a place apart and turning people into targets. I do not know what those women were. I only know what they did. They circled us. They tested the tents. They left signs. They spoke our names with borrowed voices, and they stood on the ridge, waiting for the moment someone would look back. If you ever camp near a place where locals mention women walking before dawn, do not treat it as background noise. If you see a branch planted like a stake with cloth tied to it, leave. If a voice uses your name in the dark, do not answer, do not correct it. Do not even whisper back to your friends. Walk until you reach a road, until you hear insects again, until the world sounds alive. Because the night we ran, the chase ended when we reached town. What did not end was the knowledge that recognition alone can be enough, and that some things do not need to follow you if they have already taught you how to remember them.